Well, I am here to welcome you to our afternoon plenary and to introduce our two speakers that will be leading us for the next little bit. Our first guest is the Reverend Dr. Trace Haythorn. The Reverend Dr. Trace Haythorn joined the staff of the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, Inc., which we all know to be ACPE, that's how we refer to it in the chaplain world, in 2013 as the executive director. Prior to coming to ACPE, Trace served as the executive director of the Fraser Center in Atlanta, president of the Fund for Theological Education in Atlanta, professor and program director at Hastings College in Hastings, Nebraska, and associate pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church right here in Nashville, Tennessee. He completed his Ph.D. in Cultural Foundations of Education at Syracuse University, a Master of Divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary, and a Bachelor of Arts at Austin College in Sherman, Texas. Trace is married to the Reverend Mary Anona Stoops, and they have two children, Jacob and Martha. When he's not working at ACPE or spending time with his family, Trace loves to bike, read, bake, and brew beer, but not all at the same time. Trace is excited about the future of ACPE, especially as we welcome our 50th anniversary. He believes the association is poised to develop exciting new capacities, fueled by a dynamic new structure, both of which are rooted in our rich history and cognizant of the remarkable opportunities that the future holds. Our second plenary speaker is the Reverend Martha Rucker. Reverend Rucker has chaplaincy experience in a community hospital, trauma center, long-term care facility, and currently serves at St. Thomas Hospital West in Nashville, Tennessee, as a palliative care staff chaplain. Reverend Rucker is a certified thanatologist with the Association of Death Education and Counseling, with a focus in palliative and end-of-life care. A board-certified chaplain with the Association of Professional Chaplains as well. She is the president-elect for the Association of Professional Chaplains, otherwise known as APC in chaplain circles, and looks forward to serving as the president of the association. Previously, she served as secretary and treasurer of APC and was the chair of the APC ACPE Ethics Committee. I get a cookie for that one. Reverend Rucker completed her MDiv with a focus on pastoral care from Lexington Theological Seminary in Lexington, Kentucky. She completed 5 units of CPE at Cabell Huntington Hospital, a level 2 trauma hospital in Huntington, West Virginia. Won't you join me in welcoming our speakers?
Good afternoon. That was poor. Good afternoon. Much better. Much better. Y'all just had a break. Should be a little rested, a little ready to go, right? Maybe done for the day. Maybe. So, who are we? What the heck is this all about? And how do you get to professional chaplaincy, and why should you do it? Maybe are the questions. So there are, in professional chaplaincy, certifying bodies. You heard the Association of Professional Chaplains came into existence in 1946. I dare not bore you with all the details of how we came into existence, because if I start to glaze over, you will certainly start to glaze over. But it was originally founded as the American Protestant Hospital Association, and then there were a couple mergers, but we eventually became the College of Chaplains, and then eventually the Association of Professional Chaplains, always with the same focus in mind of certifying chaplains. And then we have the National Association of Catholic Chaplains that came into existence in 1965. And you all heard from Mary Lou O'Gorman, who is currently the president of NACC. She's my former boss, too. Yay. We also have the National Association of Jewish Chaplains that came into existence in 1990, and then the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care in 1966. As you can see, through the years, professional bodies have grown. You know, it just started as really a bunch of Protestant ministers who were working in a hospital together saying, you know what, we need to do something for us. We need to be on the equal plane as other disciplines, and so how do we go about doing that? So who is the professional chaplain? What does that, who am I? Who are we as professional chaplains? We come from diverse faith traditions. We can have just about anybody and any faith tradition as a professional chaplain. It really doesn't matter from where you come and what faith tradition. There are criteria that we must follow in order to become a professional chaplain, and you will see those. But we are diverse, very, very diverse in our faith traditions. And even as association professional chaplains, we are not just Protestants. We have Muslims, Catholics, Hindus, do you know of any? Sikh, and that's just off the top of my head. So I think we do have some Jewish chaplains within our organization as well. The Association of Jewish Chaplains is very small. So, and their corporate office is smaller, and ours is a little bit larger, and we can offer more things for them, so they become a part of the larger group. We are multi-faith practitioners. Coming from diverse faith traditions, it helps us become multi-faith practitioners. We are from those diverse backgrounds, so we're able to kind of cross those spectrums, that we're able to meet people where they are and meet the patient and family exactly where they are. Even if they don't know where they are, we can step into that space with them. For example, I have worked in the hospital with Church of Christ patients and families. People familiar with Church of Christ? I'm a woman. I'm a minister. Those two things don't go too well in the Church of Christ, although when I work with the patient and their families, the Church of Christ patient and family, I honor their tradition, who they are and what they stand for. And I have space there. It's my job to be there and to offer support and to offer services to them. But as I honor them, then I am more welcomed into their space. For instance, there was a patient who wanted to be baptized. Actually, his brother called me and said the patient wants to be baptized. So I asked some questions. Is the patient requesting baptism, or is this your desire? So long story short, I ended up going to talk to the patient. The brother wanted to do the baptism. And I said, that's fine. I'll get everything together tomorrow morning. We'll have everything ready. Because being in the hospital, can't do immersion, but we would get it as close as possible. We would pour as much as we possibly could. So I got the nursing staff involved, towels, blankets, and bowls of water. And when I arrived the next morning, after having talked with the patient and his wife, the next morning said, I understand your brother wants to baptize you. And he said, no, you will. So it was a little awkward in that moment with the brother still standing there. So I said, I would be honored to do that, and will you please help? So inviting then the brother in for baptism. So there's multi-faith practitioner. It's coming into a different tradition than what I'm accustomed to, but there is truth for them, there's strength, and there's comfort in that. We've had Hindu patients, and at time of death, they have to be turned towards the east, so we make sure that those things are done in order to honor the patient and family. 90% of us are in healthcare, hospital, hospice, skilled nursing, long-term care, but 90% of board-certified chaplains find our work in the healthcare setting. But we do have other specialized settings: military, correctional, municipal, workplace, and here in Nashville, we do have a chaplain. She finished her residency just a couple years ago, and she does chaplaincy with the homeless. Oh yeah, that's right. She was here, Lindsay. That's right. So, so there are other opportunities as well that are out there. Just a little bit history of pastoral care. That years and years ago, ministers who couldn't make it in the church anymore, who had gotten in trouble perhaps, or just were lazy or whatever, were sent to the hospitals. What better place, right, to live out their days? Just kind of send them, because then the denomination, the church could kind of not pay attention to them, and they were then the hospital's responsibility. So they were sent into the hospitals. Things have changed. They are changing. Things can certainly be better. They're changing. They're shifting, because we still have a lot of the hospitals, especially in rural communities, that will have the local pastor who comes in, prays with great intentions, good hearts, but the level of oomph, the depth is lacking. So I worked in, as Lillian said, I did my residency in Huntington, West Virginia, Appalachia. And I worked in Ashland, Kentucky, which is just over the bridge from Huntington, West Virginia, over the Ohio River, the bridge. And when I was working in Ashland, I was in intensive care. I was on call. I was there on a Saturday, and I'd said to the family, I'm going to step out for just a few minutes, and but I will be right out here at the nurse's desk, and I'll be back and forth. And I had called their pastor, which the church was literally right down the hill from the hospital. And he came up, he walked in, he prayed, he came out, and he said, okay, I've done my job, now you do yours. I give him credit for recognizing that he prayed and he was out of there, because it was too much. There was too much emotion. There was just too much for him to deal with in his own ministry with his patient and family. So the current statistics, I've got a few statistics from the APC office in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. These are the current numbers for membership count is accurate. We do have 5,524 people who are members of APC. That's not necessarily board-certified chaplains. Board-certified chaplains, just over 2,600. Anybody can be a member. Just join, pay some dues, pay a membership fee. I think it's $50, is it $100? So it's $100, and you can become a member. And then you get the resources that are available through APC. The breakdown right now of those who answered, if they were male or female, 1,011 women and just almost 1,200 men. And then I just threw in there, we have started, a couple years ago, APC created hospice and palliative care certification. And it's an extra certification on top of the board certification. You have to have at least 5 years experience doing full-time palliative care work. And so it's fairly new, but we do have 7 in that area. So what do you need to do to get there? I guess I'm pointing at there, the wall, like I need to. Going, So you need, yeah, I know, it's all on the wrist. As to achieve board certification, there needs to be a graduate level theological degree, and that's a 72-hour degree. It used to be 90, but then some schools changed their degree programs and the number of hours, so it was decreased to reflect that. So 72 hours from an accredited institution. We've had people who will go to, Joe Schmo's School of Theology, and it's non-accredited, and they want to become board certified. Now we can do some equivalency stuff, but it's not going to be full equivalency. You do need endorsement by a faith group, and a minimum of 4 units of CPE. That's 16. Y'all have talked about CPE today, right? The 1,600 hours. David and Kofi were here talking about it. Okay. And then for Association of Professional Chaplains, you need to have the 2,000 hours work experience as a chaplain to become a board certified chaplain. Now in NACC, it's a little different. You don't need those 2,000 hours before board certification. That's a little difference between the two organizations. So where I finished my residency, and then I didn't work as a chaplain for a number of years because I couldn't find a job. But then once I was certified eligible, and then I worked that year and then worked on my paperwork. But my colleague at West, our priest there, he finished his residency and then started his paperwork and then went right through into board certification. We do adhere to a common code of ethics. As Lillian said, I was the chair of the Ethics Commission for APC and ACPE in 2006. We came together as two organizations, and we formed a joint process for ethics, which has worked out extremely well. It's amazing what goes on out there. Yes. Amazing. But we do adhere to a code of ethics. Each year we have to fill out a form that we are still adhering and that we are in good standing. We demonstrate 29 competencies. You write your paperwork, and then you have to sit in front of a committee and meet 29 competencies, whether in written or oral form. It sounds real scary. It does. And 29 competencies, it is a lot. It is a lot of competencies, but the beauty of the process, it is in both written and oral form. We are chaplains, and we love story. So as we gather to meet these competencies, we like to know that you've got it up here, but we also want to see that you got it right here and how the two come together. And so those competencies are in theory, identity and conduct, pastoral practice, and professionalism. And then each year, we have to do 50 hours of continuing education every year. That's a lot. But why? Why do we do it? That's a lot of work to get to this. So why do we do it? Certification parallels licensure in other peer groups. It is equal to a physician, social work, counseling, dietitians. I mean, there's any other discipline who has some sort of licensing, it parallels licensure in that group. Certification is required or preferred by many institutions because it gives a level of professionalism and accountability as well. We're not just accountable to the institution in which we serve, but we are accountable to our association at large. Board certification also increases earning potential because it says, I am a professional and I know what I'm doing, so I deserve to get paid for what I know. And it creates a peer group of professionals, and it provides opportunities for continued growth and development. If somebody had told me that in 2006, I walked across the stage and received my certification piece of paper and little pin. If somebody had told me back in 2006 that I would be where I am today as president-elect, I would have laughed in their face. Not me. No way. I just want to go take care of patients. But this organization and ACPE and the collaboration that we have together, it provides this opportunity for growth and meeting new people, and it opens up the doors of possibility. So with that, I hand it over to Trace.
And we'll have time when we finish for questions. So we want to move through a little more about CPE. Just a quick refresher, some of you may have heard this in the earlier workshop with David, but it started in the 1920s. This, for those of you who are recent seminary graduates or those who are currently within the Div School, you may be experiencing that sense of, is this really going to prepare me for what I need to do when I get out of here? Or, oh my God, this didn't prepare me for what I need to do now that I'm out of here. And so Anton Boyson had the same sense and began to experiment with this method that today we call clinical pastoral education. The key to it is the notion of the living human document, this notion of a human being an object of study, and yet it's a subject of study. It's never an objective thing. This is always a subjective relational thing. Today, when we started this work, ACPE became the organization in 1967. There were 4 groups around the country that merged together to become what is ACPE today. We were the organization until 1990. A lot of people have asked me as I've talked about this work, but is chaplaincy going to survive? Is it going to make it with all the changes in healthcare and these other areas? Is it a dying profession? What's going on? Well, today there are 16 organizations around the country that are doing certification and or something like CPE. There's CPE, CPT, CPI, CPO. They are all cousins of the thing that we call CPE. This is one of those things, too, where you want to, if you look at other opportunities, make sure you see where that's going longer term. This is a little bit like when you go to New York City and you stroll down, you've got an opportunity to buy a Rolex or an Omega watch. You want to look pretty carefully at what you're buying before you spend the money on it. And that's part of the reason we have national offices around to help answer those kinds of questions for you. The CPE unit is about 100 hours of didactic time ordinarily. And that would include individual supervision as well as group process. And for those who have been through it, they can tell you that the group process is one of the most amazing or the reason everybody hates it. In my own work, I am not a clinical pastoral education supervisor, but I did 8 units of CPE along the way, thinking that might be a route that I would take. I've had both of those group experiences along the way, and in ways that I am grateful for what I experienced, and in other ways where I think there are some things we could have done differently. And what's helpful is that both of those have continued to shape and inform the work that I do today. And about 300 hours of each unit is dedicated to direct contact, direct care, reflective practice. So why are there so many people out there doing this work? Well, one is the growing market demand, that there's more and more people looking not only for trained chaplains, that's a part of it, but there's more and more people that are looking for this method, looking for these reflective skills in their practice in different kinds of venues. Originally, this was a denominational thing. Today, CPE units are really critical for certification and employment. You heard Martha talk about how this fits into the APC accreditation piece. It's true also for NAJC, NACC, that you need to be doing these 4 units to be able to be hired. And the job factor in this is a really important piece of it, but part of what's happening now, so just on the healthcare side, is advocacy we've been doing with the Joint Commission on the Accreditation of Hospitals and Healthcare Organizations. Our work has been to try to codify that equivalency of licensing and certification so that licensing would be a part of what the Joint Commission is looking at. They're already doing that in other professions. It is hard to think about licensing chaplains in the United States. We've got this Second Amendment thing, and First Amendment thing that makes it feel like maybe, yeah, I didn't mean to go second. I don't know how I got to second. I'm so worried about the election next week right now. Really, I am. I gotta own up. I want you to try to imagine, so I live in Georgia. Who would be on the chaplaincy licensing board for the state of Georgia? Who would you put on that board? How would you choose? We have a governor right now that just made one of his signature education speeches, and it's around this. He's trying to create a special district for failing schools that the state would manage because he wanted to, and I quote, take care of the colored people in the state. So who would be on that chaplaincy licensing board? Oh my God. I still believe that was probably the first prayer. So how do you differentiate then between all these groups that are out there doing this work? The two originals in the mix are ACPE. We were the first one out. We're the only organization that's recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. Why does that matter? Well, in terms of credibility and accountability, we have somebody that's watching the work that we're doing as well. So if you go to the U.S. Department of Education's accreditation website, you will see that we are a part of the specialized professional accrediting bodies across the United States. There are no other chaplaincy education organizations doing that work. No other folks that are doing CPE or T or O or I or whatever they have at the end of their stuff that's doing that. Though there are a lot of folks out there offering product. The second that came on board is called the College of Pastoral Supervision and Psychotherapy, CPSP. They started in the 90s. They were all folks with us, and they broke off largely around issues of finance and autonomy. They got tired of a lot of the restrictions that the U.S. Department of Education was placing on us, and there's some other philosophical differences as well. They actually call their work CPT, Clinical Pastoral Training. As a person with a Ph.D. in education, I find it offensive to talk about training people. I think we train animals. I think we educate, we equip, we empower people. The E works on all of those, so it works out just fine. So there's some philosophical differences between the two. There are also some theoretical differences between the two. Our folks tend to do as much work in family systems theory and in areas like psychotherapy, where the emphasis within CPSP has been very much on the psychotherapy side, much more of a Freudian orientation to things, which I think it may have had its day, and I think it's probably good that we move past that day. Obviously, I'm going to advocate for our organization, but I wanted to at least give some sense of who one of the other players is that's out there and in the mix. Isn't CPE just for hospitals? So about 85% of our folks are in hospitals today, and since the 1930s, it's been a part of what people have called pastoral formation. As Martha noted, we're also in prisons, hospice, homeless shelters. One of the models that actually was in Minneapolis for many years, it's the last of these that's still out there, was a council of churches model. So a regional council of churches actually was the venue through which people were doing CPE. So you would go through that and then you would be placed in a number of different settings. There are some of our centers around the country now that have people that are working in group homes, that are working in homeless shelters, that are a part of a group where they meet back in a campus location. So for example, Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City has students that are placed in these different settings, but their group is back on campus. I think that model is going to continue to grow, and we'll see more and more of those kinds of opportunities in the next decade. The other thing is the method has really been the driver for this. It's about that living human document piece. The demographics for us have changed significantly. For many, many years, like what happened with APC, it was about Protestant clergy. That's who we worked with. Today, we've got over 50 different faith groups that are a part of our mix. The most recent to join us and the most recent endorser in this work is the Military Association of Freethinkers and Humanists. Basically, it's the Atheist Chaplain organization. It is difficult still for a number of our settings to be able to use atheist and chaplain and not feel like it's an oxymoron, that they don't see how those words go together. And yet, one of the fastest growing groups in the country through all the data is the nuns, the spiritual but not religious. And I think if we're going to take care of those folks, we need to have people that are trained who also know how to care for those folks and help advocate for those folks when they are in a multi-faith context. So part of what we're looking at is how we do better work attending to that population going forward. The other piece of this is that it's not just an add-on to an MDiv program. that more and more we're finding folks that are coming from a variety of different theological type educations, and in fact many are coming from things where they don't acknowledge the word theological. So, for example, we have several folks now who are coming as Buddhist practitioners. To talk with a Buddhist about theology doesn't make any sense. That's not the language that fits there. So what's the equivalent education model that would happen, and how then would that fit within a group? A couple of weeks ago I was actually up at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and they have on their staff currently, among their chaplains, they have a Quaker, a Unitarian, a Buddhist, a Muslim. They have 4 Catholic priests, which is all about the heritage of who they are, but each of those Catholic priests is from different countries. So there's an international flavor to that that is really interesting. They have a very conservative Protestant clergyman, but they're a team. They're this wonderful, and their director is a Catholic sister. They are this remarkably diverse team, and if there is an issue with a Buddhist patient, they don't call the Buddhist chaplain, but the Buddhist chaplain is there to help resource their peer in the place. I think this is a model that we'll see more and more of as well, is these kinds of diverse staff groupings that recognize that it's the work that you do as a team that equips you to be able to go out and serve whoever you're called to serve. And the core piece of this, I hope that David emphasized this, but the piece that's really important to me and how this happens, much like when a physician goes in, what the physician has to work with is a patient's body, and whatever their expertise is related to that body. When a chaplain goes in to work with somebody, they've got their spirit, their existential entity, their reason for being, their meaning and their purpose. And we want to believe that every person has that in one way or another. The chaplain's role is usually a short-term role. It's not a long-term role. This person's going to transition and go back into their community. So when you're caring for that person, you don't want to bring your theology and impose it upon them. In doing so, it is just like a physician that is trying to bring something to them that doesn't already belong as a part of that body. That doesn't work. How then do you find integrative ways to help a person draw upon the resources that are already within them so that they can take that and grow and move through a process of wholeness so they can transition back into their community and have better prospects for health longer term? I think one of the things that guides us in this now, some of you may be familiar, the definition of health from the World Health Organization in 2002 began to include spiritual health, along with physical, social, and emotional health. That spiritual is one of the 4 dimensions of health that is recognized globally is a really important piece to keep in mind, especially as you're thinking about this as a vocation. If the World Health Organization is acknowledging this, we're on the edge of something really exciting in this work going forward. One of the places that we're starting to see some new opportunities emerge is in that leadership interest. We have a colleague in Minneapolis who just led a CPE unit, modified somewhat, but it was all for healthcare administrators. So these are all people working in the hospital administration side to gain these reflective capacities and be thinking about how they engage with all the people they're working with, including the patients and their families, more effectively. How do they engage them as spiritual beings and with that spiritual dimension as a part of their health? What they're finding is not only is it helping them in that reflective practice, but it also has made this program so much more valuable to the rest of the hospital. So now they want everybody in their department to have an opportunity to do this. We don't have enough staff there to be able to cover all of that, but it tells me that there's a growing opportunity here. People are hungry for the kind of meaning that we're able to get to in this work. The other thing that we get, probably once a week, I get a phone call from somebody somewhere in the world that wants to start a CPE program in their country. That back in the 1960s and 70s, ACPE was as guilty as lots of organizations of really following the same kind of colonialist patterns that we've had within the church for a long time. What we said was we need to stop that. If somebody wants to work with us, we will work with them, but we'll do that in a way that's culturally appropriate. Now we're being invited into these situations, and people are looking for resources and want to know how we can resource them. That feels different than coming in and saying, we're going to teach you about CPE. Instead, it's, we know about this, we think there's some value here, and we want to begin to develop something that will work within our country. Will you help us? I can do that. That sounds pretty cool. And to give you an idea of how diverse these places have been, it has been from every continent except Antarctica. So far, Antarctica is not really interested in CPE. They probably need it as much as they're closed in. Never mind. The other part of this, I don't really like the language of bivocational. I tend to think bi-occupational, that you have a vocation, but that you might be doing different jobs. Many of you are a part of traditions, I would imagine, that are looking at churches closing more often than churches opening. Finding a position as a congregational leader is harder and harder, especially in a position that is a sustainable position. That's that code word, sustainable, means you get paid a living wage. Even as people say, well, you didn't go into it for the money. Well, no, but I didn't go into it to starve either. One of the things that we're beginning to see more and more of is folks who are going into parish positions in a part-time role and then also working part-time in either hospice or hospital. And if you're board certified, that makes you valuable in some pretty remarkable ways. There's enough resource there then to be able to provide a meaningful occupation so that you can live out your vocation. But the other part of that I think is really important, when you have a ministry that's based in both of those places, when you're based in the congregation, you know your people are always going to be worried about growth. That's always an issue that's on a front burner. How do we grow? How do we get more people here? It is an acquisitional orientation to leadership management, if you will. When you're in the clinical setting, you are there, but you're not always connected to the parish setting. When you're in both, you have a much greater community impact opportunity. You actually have a ministry to the community, not just to one or the other. So I really want to encourage people to be exploring this, not simply because it's a way to feed your face, but also because it is a way to have a greater impact in this kind of work in ways that we've got to start thinking strategically about professions. I think across the professions, the idea of the good old full-time job will not be the norm. It'll still be out there, but it's not going to be the norm that it once was. That's going to be true in higher ed. That's going to be true in all the places where chaplains serve, prisons, a variety of different settings. Knowing that, how do you equip yourself through a combination of board certification as well as endorsement or ordination within a tradition to be able to be much more viable, if you will, within your professional work? So we want to open it up and offer some time for questions. To transition into this, one of the things I feel like I should share, so I'm an administrator, right? I work in an office. That's what I do. And I have 8 units of CPE. And yet, if I hadn't done those units, I couldn't do what I'm doing today. When I started in my very first unit, I was sharing with some folks earlier, I did an intro to CPE unit before I ever did a CPE unit. That's how much of a junkie I was along the way. So I started at the very beginning of this process at Robert Wood Johnson Hospital, and we worked on the orthopedic floor because that was supposed to be the easy floor. My very first day, I was asked to see 2 patients. I wound up seeing 3, but I was asked to see 2. My first was a high school boy, a senior, who had just broken his leg in a football game, and it was the day that the scouts had come to watch him for college scholarships. So I felt okay, I could do that. I was there, I was with him. We cried a little, he and his mom hugged, we prayed. I was on, this was good. Second guy that I went to go see had been in a motorcycle accident and had no skin on most of the front of him. And that was all open and exposed when I went to go visit. But the nurses really wanted somebody to come and talk because he was angry. And they wanted somebody to try to engage him and talk about these things with him. He had these heat lamps that were on him trying to help his skin dry as they were grafting things on. There are smells and sights involved in all of this that I wasn't ready for. So when I left his room, because he didn't want to pray, in fact, he told me that me and my God could go somewhere that was not necessarily polite. So it was a really tough second visit. And I thought, well, that's 2, I'm done. And I started to head down the hall to leave, and a nurse grabbed me and said, do you know about the patient in this next room? And I said, I'm just an intern. I've seen my 2. No. I'm supposed to be done. Bye-bye. Thanks very much. She said, we need you in there right now. She's about to wake up. She's stirring. She's going to wake up and realize that she's paralyzed from the waist down. She was in a housing project. We think she was thrown from either the third or fourth balcony. It looks like it was a drug deal gone bad. And oh, by the way, this was 1989. Oh, by the way, we think also that she's going to learn for the first time that she's HIV positive. So we need you there now. So this work is not for the faint of heart. And yet, what wound up happening is I saw her I was only there once a week, but I saw her every week. And the last time that I got to be with her, she asked if I would read the Christmas narratives with her back and forth from her Bible. And she hadn't been to church in a long time, but she felt like if there was anything that was going to give her grounding in this moment, it was going to be that. And I also got to see that other guy from the motorcycle accident multiple times afterwards. I never got to see the kid again, but I got to see these other two. And there was a kind of transforming peace in those relationships. And much of it was because I came back, that I was just willing to be there and be in that with them and just talk with them. I didn't have to do anything else. And it was one of the hardest things in the world to come away from that and to realize that just being there was enough. Everybody else had their special stuff to do. Nurses came in and checked stuff and changed stuff and poked stuff and drew stuff. I didn't have anything to poke or draw or change. The doctors came in with big, heavy diagnosis, and everybody got quiet when the doctor arrived. I just came in and hung out, and eventually, read a Bible with this woman, King James even, which was not my thing, but we read it because it was meaningful to her. It really meant something in the midst of all the chaos of her life. This was a grounding thing. And my last time with her, I got to hold hands, and we cried, and we laughed, and I wished her well. And one of the hardest parts of this work is I have no idea what happened next. That there is a part of entering into this where you have to be open to the existential realities that you don't get to know. And if you can go there and realize what an unbelievable privilege that is. Now, going from that, it was hard. The fact that I carry the amount of emotion that I do about those two people in my mind, this was 27 years ago, and they are here. They're right here. The CPE group that I had was awkward. We were just trying to figure some things out. My second CPE group was terrible. It was awful. One of the guys was a part of an Aryan nation on the Front Range of Colorado. The other guy had just been released from an inpatient mental health unit. He was really struggling. And here I was, this young Presbyterian guy who was hoping to maybe get married one day. And I was still thinking about youth ministry at this point. And wasn't loving Jesus enough? Oh, God. So it wound up being an incredible kind of growth experience. I don't ever want to be in group with those two guys ever again. But I went on to do a residency after that and had an amazing and transformative group. And in fact, two of those folks went on to become CPE supervisors, and then had another group experience where two of the folks out of that became CPE supervisors. And those kinds of rich and amazing experiences are always available. We know that there are hard stories, but I want to believe that those hard stories are just as valuable as all of the others. And I don't care where you think you're going to land in ministry. There's a part of me that says, please come and do this work. Try this work. Be a part of this work. And there's another part of me that wants to say, especially to those of you that have a little bit of competitiveness within you, I dare you to do this work. Because you will not find another ministry context that will push you to not only know yourself at a depth that you're probably not willing to go, but also to have to encounter people in places that most people never want to dream of going. Bring it. Yeah. If you're ready to go there, if you think you're ready to go there, then we've got some vocational opportunity we'd love to explore with you. So questions. What do you want to know?
And Trace, because we're recording, if you're going to ask a question, just raise your hand so that either Angela or I can run with you toward you with the microphone. Run toward you.
This is a question for Reverend Rucker. You were introduced, Martha. You were introduced as a certified thanatologist.
Yes.
I'm wondering what you feel that brings to your work as a chaplain.
Good question. Thanatology, if you don't know, is the study of death, dying, and bereavement. So it is extremely pertinent in what I do, especially as a palliative care chaplain. Palliative care covers a spectrum of diagnosis to end of life, and it can fall anywhere in between. It can be years. Oftentimes, though, in the hospital setting, unfortunately, we get a consult at the very end. So having that additional, it was a choice for me to go and receive that certification. Nobody told me I had to go do it or it was required for this. I wanted to push myself to the next level of having to be challenged a little bit more, as Trace was talking about, in learning more and being more involved with this area of death, dying, and bereavement, where so many people are afraid to talk about it, to live in it, experience it, let it be, and let's talk about it. So it is extremely pertinent in every day, not just palliative, but the work I do just as a chaplain.
Maybe a little more specifically, I'm curious if that brings more of an academic or a medical, like the physiology of death, or can you expound a little bit?
An example of, would that help? Well, I don't know if I would necessarily be lacking, because it is a passion of mine, where my colleague has a passion in ethics. So his study is more in ethics. Or the priest chaplain I work with, he really enjoys working with heart and cardiac patients. So his continuing education, his drive, although we meet the needs of all patients, his drive is more towards cardiac patients. So my passion is in end of life. And so it's both academic, because I need to keep up education hours for that. So that's challenging for me. But it's also practical, because I share the practical wisdom with patients and families. And I find myself, especially with children, that when children come alongside of, grandma has died, and so coming along, because oftentimes we want to shield our children, and done out of love and compassion for sure, but it's because the parents don't necessarily know, they don't even know how to deal with it themselves, let alone help a 5-year-old deal with it. So my understanding and my continued work in death education and focusing on how to talk to a child and present things to a family and to the children, even in that moment, if it's appropriate. Does that help? Okay.
Hi, this is also for you, Martha.
All right.
And I'm going to apologize in advance for this question, but you are the president-elect. How do you want to see the APC grow within your tenure?
Wow. Oh my God, I'm just the president-elect right now. And it just started on November 1st. Yeah, oh my gosh. How I've seen it grow in the past 10 years is a great collaboration with other organizations, NACC, ACPE, NAJC, where we're coming alongside one another and we're recognizing the value of each organization. And so I think it is the goal, and we have set a strategic plan. We are in a new strategic plan for the next 3 years, in really developing or continuing that development of collaboration with these other organizations, but to also look at our members and to really pay attention to what it is our members want and need. That we have people serving in places that are so rural, and they're one-person department, and they have nobody to rely on. So what can we as an organization do to come up and raise them up and help them. So it's a combination of looking at our membership. I mean, of course, we want to grow, too. You know, we want to certify people. We want to see people come and present their paperwork and sit around and sit in front of a committee. And we celebrate huge when people walk across that stage to get their certificate. We celebrate really, really well.
It's kind of silly.
It is, but we celebrate. We celebrate pretty well because we understand that accomplishment. So we want to see, we certainly want to see more board certified chaplains. We also, I want to be able to see that this relationship with these cognate groups grows and it just becomes stronger and stronger.
Can I add one piece to that? Because I know things that we're working on that she doesn't know yet, but will.
Because I'm brand new.
Yeah.
That's right.
So we have just entered into an agreement between these four organizations around a joint marketing campaign, largely because we've never marketed before. You said CPE and people just assumed they knew what you were talking about. With all these other entities out there now, you can't assume that you know what you're talking about anymore. So we feel like it's important both with the ATS accredited schools, the Association of Theological Schools, folks, so that they know what's going on. So we presented this summer and had a table this summer. They've never had tables at an ATS biennial, but they asked if we would be willing to put some stuff out for them because they're interested in chaplaincy. One of the fastest growing certificate and master's programs now amongst ATS schools is in chaplaincy. So that piece we're doing together. One of the things we're looking at is the possibility of a new podcast through NPR that would be just for and about chaplains. We think we've already got a 20,000 person market to make that happen. So I always have to think about the business side of this stuff. Yeah, it's really, you didn't even know this was good. Yeah, see?
It's next week's board meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, Mary wouldn't know either. So this has all happened in the last 10 days. The other is looking at, so our organization does more active fundraising than anybody else, and looking at getting grants that help us develop the profession. So we just got a $250,000 grant from the Luce Foundation, learned yesterday, yes, thank you, I'm very excited about that, that will help us take a look at, comprehensively at clinical pastoral education and then professional chaplaincy and the relationship between the two and the standards between the two, so that we really can begin to give a good research basis for all of these things as well. There are organizations now that are claiming to have evidence-based standards. I'm here to tell you that those evidence-based standards are preliminary at best. There has been no research that has been conducted in spiritual care that has ever been replicated. It's ever been done twice. There has been no research in spiritual care that has been done with a significant enough population that we can say we really know this now. There's a lot of stuff out there in research in spiritual care that's introductory, that's helpful, that's raised some better questions for the next stage of the research. But this is the beginning of a new era of this work. So when you see those kinds of things advertised, feel free to give us a call, and I can help clarify what's behind some of that.
Thank you. I'm just curious about people being endorsed and getting certification. Do you know what percentage of those people are already ordained? Can they be endorsed and go on to get ordained, or never be ordained, or what's the percentage of lay and ordained people who get certified?
So this is a great way to show, too, the partnership that we have. When somebody is calling, it needs to have endorsement. Often the staff at APC will call us to say, does this work? It's hard to say a percentage because of the diversity of faith groups that are there and the way that different people do this. And especially with the rise of people that are in independent congregations. How do you get endorsed if you're a part of a non-denominational or independent group? So we work in our office to have a catalog basically of references that we can look at and say, does this work or not? And then if we say it looks good, then APC will usually say it looks good as well. For folks who are coming out of traditional faith groups that we recognize, mainly Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, there's a pretty clear track for all three of those. It is clearer now for Buddhists. It is pretty clear for Sikhs. And as I keep going down the continuum, it gets harder and harder to identify. So that, for example, we have a number of new students that have come to us from the Mormon tradition. Mormon don't have clergy in the same way that Quakers don't have clergy. How do you get endorsed if you're not clergy to do this work? Well, we actually have a pretty good model that comes from the Catholic Church because of Catholic women religious, that they wouldn't have the same sort of endorsement that the men would have had. So if we can work with that, why can't we work with all of these? The newest is figuring out what to do with the folks that are identifying as spiritual, not religious, and no affiliation whatsoever. The issue has been around accountability. How do we know that there's some other group out there that's accountable? And it hasn't been as much our organizations that have wanted to know that, but the places where people go to work. They want to know that there's something else out there, that you're not just a freelancer, and that you do whatever you want to do. So it's not meant to be disparaging of anybody. It's part of the larger professional liability piece that everybody has. And yeah, part of the background that we have to work on are all sorts of insurance policies that cover this kind of stuff. Increasingly, we're now being asked, and this is happening in denominations as well, we're being asked to cover a liability policy for students that are out there so that places feel like that's okay. It's not because anything terrible has happened, it's because lawyers run the world. And as long as lawyers run the world, then we'll have, lawyers run the world, and they seem to be married to people in insurance. That seems to be the relationship, how that's worked out. So we don't have exact percentages on how all that works out. You got a much longer answer than probably what you were looking for. But to give you a sense of, we work very hard to make sure that people with integrity in the process get the endorsement they need to move through their process.
Kind of tail into that question, do you have a list of approved endorsements for people coming in for non-denominational, like if these are already organizations that are approved?
So there's not an official list, because the list changes all the time too. Even some of the groups that we've worked with in the past, they keep changing their name, or they change leadership, or a church shuts down and moves, or it splits, and it's too hard to stay current with it. So we really do a case-by-case basis. And the person who fields those calls in our office usually will come and ask me to work with her, and if I've got a question, I usually will consult with our colleagues at the Association of Theological Schools to try to make it all work out. The goal is not to keep people out, just so you hear that piece. This is not just a gatekeeping exercise.
Yes, this question is for the President-elect, Chaplain Martha. You say that you feel that you're called to the death and dying segment of this picture. What sustains you and keeps you going in that? And I guess the second part question, through all of this, do you get the opportunity sometime to do the eulogy of those patients that you come in contact with?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, there was a former vice president of mission at St. Thomas West who would talk about, the big buzzword out is work-life balance, but he would talk about integration, work-life integration. And so how does your work and your life are integrated? So I can find balance, I can find grounding in my life at work, and I can do the same at home. So how do I do that? For every person, it's different. At the end of the day, I will do a ritual for myself as I walk out of the hospital. And as Trace was talking, that we have hard cases. This is hard stuff we go into. And I will do a ritual as I leave the hospital. I will think of each person I've encountered, including staff, and I will figuratively shed them from me. And I will leave them there knowing that there's going to be someone else taking care of them. And that's the painful, oftentimes the painful part of our job, is that we don't know what happens to them all the time. But I will do that ritual for myself. I also live in Clarksville. So I live an hour away. And a lot of people go, oh my God, are you crazy? I have been commuting in my life since 2004. At first, I was thinking, this is absolutely nuts. What are you doing? One day you're going to live and work in the same town. But maybe not, because I take that hour to process, to pray, to let go. And as I'm coming into work, if traffic is okay, I use that time to get ready to move into the work for the day. And then as I go home, I use that hour to get ready to be wife and mother. So it's an integration for me, because even when I walk into the house, I've figuratively let them go, but my husband says, "How was your day?" And he's a paramedic, so he sees a lot of stuff as well. When the other night, for example, he called me and said, "I have been called into work, so I won't be home by the time you get home." Well, I'd had a terrible afternoon. So I said, okay, well, our son is taken care of, and he's going to work. I'm going shopping. So, and I did. And I went shopping, and the issues were still there when I walked out of the store, but I did have a bag full of new clothes. But, so I got, so for a moment, I felt really good. But I texted him and said, selfishly, I need you, and I needed you at home. So he said, he hates going in for overtime. He hates it. And he said, I wouldn't go if I didn't absolutely have to, and blah, blah, blah. But then about 15 minutes later, he called me and said, I can't be at home, but I am right here. So I have people in my life who come alongside me too, and where I can kind of, but we don't spend a whole lot of time on it because it doesn't take over our relationship. Now, do I do eulogies? Yes. It's not often, but I do it because sometimes, oftentimes, especially in this culture, a lot of people already have a church or a temple, synagogue, or they have some faith person in their life. What I've done most is when we've had an associate at the hospital who has died, and I will do a memorial service at the hospital for the associate and for that department. So there is opportunity for it, of course. These relationships are established, and sometimes we get it. Sometimes we really get in there, and somebody doesn't. We've done weddings at the bedside. Weddings. We've done funerals, memorial services. We've done baptisms, any kind of. I've also done services for a patient at the bedside whose family member has died, and they're unable to get to the funeral. So we do a ritual at the bedside so they can feel a part of that experience. Answer? Good?
While she's running, let me also say that part of what you learn in CPE is how to do that integration.
That's true. That's true.
My question is about the 50 hours of continuing education. Do y'all provide that education, or where do we look for that education?
Yes. APC has webinars that are available. This could count as continuing education. If you go to any kind of seminar, if you read, now you can't do all 50 hours in just reading, but you can read so many hours in each section that you can top out. But APC does provide opportunities. I know in conferences, yes, the annual conference, you can probably at conference get up to, probably, if you were really gung-ho about it, you could probably get 15 to 20 hours if you were to attend conference. But Nashville is ripe with opportunities, really, for continuing education. There's things that are happening, and you don't have to turn in. The great thing about it, one of the great things about APC, so when I first started, you had to keep the certificates and then hand them in. Now, you write it. It calculates, actually it's done on an Excel spreadsheet, it calculates and you turn it in. So you don't have to turn in any extra certificates or things like that. I know that we've added that 5 hours out of the 50 hours have to be in research-based, so you can read about it or attend a conference, a seminar about research.
I don't have this question fully formulated, so bear with me, but I'm a post-MDiv student and kind of discerning next steps, and I've been thinking about CPE, but know that I have some, I guess, reservation or what I would call baggage in terms of, like, I've had a lot of people in my life die, and so being in a hospital freaks me out, and having to, like, constantly be faced with hard things that bring up my own personal stuff. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice, tools, comments, suggestions for students who may be coming into CPE placements, and how do you, like, you talked about work-life integration, but what about, like, work, spiritual, like that, or like personal life kind of integration, and how you navigate that really hard shit that comes up?
I know. Fill out an application and send it in. We're taking applications for a summer unit. Seriously, you know, in all seriousness, yeah, I don't think there is one of us who has gone into CPE without some shit hanging off the back. And I'm not kidding. Whether we realized it or not, because many of us didn't even realize it. We thought our lives were, me being one, I thought my life was pretty daggone good. And then I realized, wow, man, there's some pretty messed up stuff. So, because I lived in this world where my parents thought, and my mom specifically thought everything was just wonderful and beautiful. And I went into life like that. So, seriously, we all have our baggage, and it's not counseling, it's not therapy, but it is a space to be able to explore who you are so that you are able to go meet the people where they are. Because if you don't know who you are, you certainly can't take care of somebody who's laying in the bed, struggling. So I think with all of that, and you've hit the first step. You say, man, I've got a lot of stuff and I don't like it. I don't like death. And okay, neither do I. But I don't like it. But I think recognizing it and then saying, you know what, I'm really feeling this push, this draw to this kind of work, then you need to honor that as well, because this stuff can be worked on.
I can give some personal testimony to that experience. So the day I arrived at Children's Medical Center in Dallas to begin a residency, I learned that my father was in the hospital next door, Parkland Hospital. The two buildings share a wall. He was beginning what was eventually going to be, from a kind of a freak accident, would lead to the amputation of his leg below the left knee. He had been a biathlete before this and a weightlifter. So here was a man in his late 40s suddenly trying to come to terms with all of that. That began the year. In the middle of the year, my brother finally admitted an addiction history that had gone on for many years, but he'd never been honest with my parents. A little later on in the year, my cousins came into the ER when I was the chaplain on duty, and their baby had died. And then I finished the year out. Finally, I decided I needed to pick up some work that was just fun, something I could do where I didn't care about it. So I got a job tending bar at a Chili's. And we had a weekend softball tournament between all the different Chili's stores around the Metro Dallas area, which looked like it was going to be fun. And another guy and I dove for the same softball. And he wound up having to be care flighted off the field. And I wound up having to get most of my frontal face reconstructed. Freak accident again. And he almost died. I survived. I was fine. But he almost died. So as much as I tried not to deal with and I thought I was ready. I'm a straight, white, middle American, middle-class guy. I was ready to take it all on because that's what I was raised to do. I'm a third. They call me Trace because I'm the third. Uno, dos, Trace. Named from my father and my grandfather. I am a man of great power. If you don't appreciate this, neither do I. I thought I was ready, and what that experience did, probably one of the most powerful moments of that year is when a mother brought in her daughter, Catholic mom, Catholic child, brought in a daughter who had been sexually assaulted by her father multiple times, and the mother finally brought her in because she didn't know what else to do. She didn't know how to call a social worker. She was Hispanic. It was an awful, awful moment, and this was a rare thing within the Hispanic community. This didn't happen very often. So we had a protocol where we called the Catholic priest to come in and be with the family. It was the new guy at the parish, who came in and was totally unnerved and didn't know what to do, and went to the little girl and said, well, why don't we take a moment to say the Our Father together? Up until that point, I didn't understand why people were so worked up about inclusive language. Let me say from that point forward, I have been a strong advocate for whatever your tradition is. You find words that pay attention to the words and recognize what you're doing in the moment. Now, it may have been that this little girl had a very idealized image of father that was very different than what was happening to her at the time, but all that other stuff was happening around that moment. And what that allowed me to do was be present in a way. Actually, before the prayer started, I asked the priest to step out for a minute, and I made up something to talk to him about, and then I told him why I pulled him out, because of what that felt like. And I said, I don't know if this would have been this may have been a moment to give God an idealized image for the girl to help replace what felt like father to her. I don't know. But let me just say how awkward that felt. And can we go in together and talk about some other things with them? And we did. And we wound up, I think he wound up singing, bless his heart, he was looking for anything he had in his bag of tricks. Wound up singing Jesus Loves the Little Children, which wound up being a sweet thing and wound up being an okay thing. But I think what happens in this is whatever you bring in, it doesn't matter how settled you think you are, it will be unsettled, because you're going to a place that 90% of the population never wants to go, and in fact feels utterly disoriented when they get there. The fact that people do this for a living is impressive as hell. And it's just amazing. So I will say, I'm glad that Martha talked about integration, because work-life balance is a lie. There's no such thing. Knowing that, what then is an integrated life? And that's a big part of what we try to do in these programs.
Okay, well, I've got a couple words of final instruction, but let's thank you to Trace and to Martha for your work. In just a few minutes, we're going to be moving into dinner. They're going to be setting up just across the hall here. If you're a local person, we ordered lots of food. We ordered extra food. So if you're a local person and there's someone that you would like to invite to come over for dinner, they're very welcome to do that. There should be plenty for all. You're going to have a few minutes to take a break and stretch your legs. But what I'd love to do before we do that, if everyone who is willing might be willing to go up to the front of the room, we're going to take a picture. And if you don't feel comfortable participating, that's fine. But for those of you who do, we'd love to be able to just capture this minute before we move into the last part of dinner. Thanks.